As you'll probably have noticed, the toilets are just outside on the landing there. Should there be a fire, the only way out is down the stairs, so I'd ask you to be calm. Make your way down the stairs. This is not a fundraising event, but donations towards the costs of it would be welcome. I'm not asking for large donations, and I've been embarrassed to see some of the size of some of the donations already. If there's any profit, then that will go to the shop, the iPod shop, not to any particular political party. The format of this will be that each of the people on the platform here will speak for about 15 minutes maximum, and then we'll break to get it to cool down a bit, because it's pretty hot, even though the windows are and then come back after 10 or 15 minutes for a questions and discussion session. As a group, the referendum and the West Bank have been meeting for more than a year, well over a year, every month. Usually it's in the Glen Tavern. And before the referendum, we were very active discussing tactics and campaigning and all that sort of stuff. After the referendum, there was a feeling of shock and disappointment. But we quickly got ourselves together again and we started talking again. But over the months, we've kind of begun to wonder what is the purpose of this, and especially once the political campaigns began, our role has really not been clear. Our role is not to do door-to-door canvassing, that's the political process. And I thought to myself, well, what is the purpose of this group of Yes Alliance people? And I think what it is that what we're aiming for is not the end, it's a means to an end. And we need to keep our eye on what is the goal that we're aiming towards. Not the immediate goal of getting people in office, but what if we do manage to get the powers? What if eventually we do manage to get independence? What then? How do we get to there? And so I've asked, I thought to myself, well, who are the people that are thinking about this just now? And I've been reading Blossom and seeking to it to be like Blossom. And I find myself agreeing with all the kinds of ideas Lesley has been putting in that book. But I've also been reading on like Tom Wheel, and I think that I agree with a lot of their ideas too. And so the concept is that I would invite Lesley and Tom Wheel to give us a talk about where they think we might be going. The Yes movement, the Yes movement, which is still very much alive. And after that, Lewis, who's just come down and sit in front here, he went and invited Jonathan to come along to add his perception of where we should be going from radical independence's point of view. So without further ado, I'd like to begin by asking Lesley if she would share her ideas of where we might be going in the future with the independence movement, the Yes Scotland movement. Yes.
Extraordinary thing. I was just saying to Jonathan, we don't ever have a time like this again in our lives. When you go to a meeting, even a meeting that's supposed to be about the difficulty of keeping people coming to meetings, and you have to find your way through it. I mean, you know, there's many of us in this room who are old enough to remember when it wasn't like this at all. And actually, I don't think you cast your mind back far. It was just 2 years ago that it wasn't like this at all. I think come on, guys, didn't have a punch up at the back. I mean, you could fight over one chair if anybody's feeling kind of wobbly. But I think first of all, it's probably quite important still to take stock of just quite how remarkable this is. I was speaking in Carnoustie at their Festival of Sharing, which was on Saturday, which was an astonishing variant on the theme, if you like. They had guerrilla gardeners there. These are people that they want to link up right around Scotland through Common Wheel to basically take over derelict space, to not be waiting for the 5-year, 10-year gap site to be resolved, but to start moving in and do something with the space right now. And personally speaking, everyone has their temperamental differences. I'm a very doer type person, and I think it's actually a tremendous way to start to understand what your capacity is. Because talking is great, it absolutely is, but to my mind doing is infinitely better. Because in the act of doing something together, cooperatively, you discover some of the tough stuff, you discover your strengths, and you begin to build the framework of a different kind of Scotland. So some of the things they were doing, they had done the guerrilla gardener thing, and they're now trying to connect up with people doing the same thing all over Scotland. They have to be said, Dundee is currently a bit of an epicentre of guerrilla gardening, as befits the Yes City. What else did they do? 5 of them had boldly gone to a meeting of landowners in Kirriemuir. Now, it was either the Tories or the landowners that called the meeting. It doesn't matter really which one, because the other set had come. And obviously they had expected it to be a slightly entre-nous sort of meeting. And these 5 bold folk had turned up and forced themselves to ask the first questions. Just straightforward questions about how much of Scotland do you own? You know, are you prepared to go along with some of the land reform suggestions that you involve the community in your management plans? I mean, it's hardly radical, is it? And that was an incredible thing to do because, you know, everyone can talk very bravely about, oh yeah, let's go along to a meeting like that and disrupt it. They weren't even disrupting it, they were just asking questions. But the meeting ended 45 minutes early. Wonder why. So there's some very practical things beginning to kind of come out of some groups. And to me, this is a great way forward because there's a right range of practical things sort of needing doing. You know, possibly I have very strong views about the lack of genuine local democracy in Scotland. And the fact that, just in case anyone hasn't had it before, but just in a nutshell, I actually had to amend these figures recently because the Scottish population has grown ever so teensy-weensy since I actually started writing the book. So it's now true to say that the average Scottish council has 175,000 people, and just to give a point of comparison, the average Norwegian council currently has about 12,000. The average German council has about 8,000. The average European council, if you could produce such a thing, is 14,000. We're on 175,000 is our average. We're way, way off beat. And if you're just to look at Germany, for example, particularly, because they do badly as an economy, and they've won the World Cup, the size of their municipalities is 15 square kilometres. Now, there must be folk that can do the maths in the room. What size is Dunfermline? It's about, it must be more than that. Well, this in any other European country, and I mean probably any, this would be a council. So there's something very wrong-sized about the way Scotland's functioning, and actually that's something we can fix in the Scottish Parliament, if anybody gave a damn. Now, currently, generally people don't, because we're all going hell for leather towards the general election. It is causing a slight sort of discombobulation, because people are not quite sure how to fit in, I think. The number of things I've been asked to speak at, which is entitled Beyond the Election, you know, we're not even there yet, and people are still, what their interest is almost, once we get the general election out of the way, we can get back to our politics again, about our parliament and the stuff that we can affect. And in a way I think that's quite encouraging, because it's absolutely true. One of many reasons I wasn't interested in standing for Westminster was it's not my parliament. I can entirely see why Sinn Féin didn't take their seats in 1918. I don't particularly wish it on anybody, actually, to spend very much time in London. It's a very isolating experience. I used to work in Westminster, and I voluntarily came home to know John. It was that good. So to me, it's no bad thing that people are ready to kind of have a bit of a refocus. But I wonder what we will have then, because clearly the SNP is extremely popular. They're doing very well. There's a lot of stuff. You could hardly argue with almost any of the platforms being put forward at the moment. But there's a lot of these issues that are not being picked up. Nobody's talking about local disempowerment, except Jim Murphy, who talks about it, talks about the idea of taking power beyond Hollywood. But when anybody asks him a bit more detail about it, and it's never one of the broadcasters, let's say, there's nothing there. It's talking shops. We're beyond that. We're well beyond that. And it just strikes me that the next thing that we need to get into is to try to empower Scots within our own society to dismantle the sort of top-down elitist, remote structures that mean that a town like Dunfermline is not an entity which you can fix yourselves, which you can get involved in. And actually, one thing to answer the question more directly, which was put, is it strikes me that one of the reasons there is such a huge growth in political party membership, particularly SNP membership, and this sort of political activism, is because quite literally there is no other game in town. You ain't got nowhere else to go in Scotland. If you want to get involved in politics, it means parties. It means gatherings like this. In any kind of more functioning democracy, half of you would be councillors. Now, I realise there weren't many hats flying in the air at that suggestion. This is not to malign any councillors, because I'm only ever talking about structures here, not the folk who inhabit them. But so low is the stock of the whole local business that nobody even sees that as a compliment. A statistic to chuck out, in Norway, 1 in 81 Norwegians stands for election. Stands in the local elections, 1 in 81. In Scotland, that figure is 1 in 2,071. Now, 90% of the services we'll use and the things that affect us, and actually the things that shape us really, occur within 5 miles of our front doors. And that area is the least respected, the least populated by your energy, all our energy, of any of the various political platforms that Britain has to offer. Indeed, the highest compliment anyone can pay someone is to say, you could be an MP. It's wrong. If you could be an MP, then do something useful with your life. So the thing is, I think we need to upend our value system here a wee bit, to start to put a huge emphasis on the value of getting things right in the local area, and actually chunking major bits of funding to the local area too. And I know that currently the Scottish Government's big emphasis is on community everything, community buyouts, community land buyouts and so on. And this may be a strange sort of thing coming from me, because I was a trustee of the Isle of Egg Trust for 8 years, which was a phenomenal community buyout, and I'm not knocking them at all. Do you know though, in a right organised society, there are no community buyouts. You don't need a buyout from a functioning system. The more you see the word community opt-out, community buyout, basically a way to remove yourself from the mess, if you have the capacity, if you therefore possibly have the money behind you, is that egalitarian? Is that uniform? Is that fair? I wonder now. I think we've reached the limits of this, and I think that the path that the government's taking, which is to try to create more and more money to go through expensive buyouts of land, rather than start to look at a land value tax, which would take some of the inflated price of land out of the system, that has to be another goal, actually. So I'd like to sort of, in a way, perhaps question what politics is, because it has become very, very much, in people's minds, a battleground a reenactment, perhaps, of Bonnie Prince Charlie, where Alex Salmond, with his cheeks sucked in, perhaps, in a wee pigtail, gets further than Garland this time. You know, and it's a kind of epicness about it. It's like an extended battlefield. And actually, I don't think that's the way politics works. Politics is about the location and distribution of power. And in that respect, there are all sorts of difficulties in Scotland about the location and distribution of power. For sure, the location of it in Westminster helps nobody. And the nonsense that we've been hearing over the last day or two about Longannet closing, potentially being the fault of Scotland's trying to expand its renewable energy resources, has got to be the most laughable load of nonsense you've ever heard. So, of course, this dimension is a hugely difficult one for Scotland. But to come back to the original point, what sort of Scotland do we want to have when the day comes? Are we reshaping this society, which is as top-down, elitist and unfair, I'm afraid, as England? The structures of it are. Inside our heads, it ain't. Outside our heads, it is. And I just think we can be doing some work, not to quote David Cameron, because I'm sure actually this was a saying long before he paraphrased it, but that kind of idea about making hay while the sun shines or mending your roof while the sun shines, you can see the point. We have time now to be starting to do some work on ourselves, to try to kind of improve the old muscle tone of us old horses, before we have that incredible steeplechase to run again. And it's not just to try and resolve the problems, it's to demonstrate to the 55% that this isn't just a huge totemic battle with London. This is the fulcrum. This is the moment of birth of a new society within Scotland, which was there, but has been overlain. And we're ready and willing to do the donkey work to get it breathing again. And I think you have to think that these kind of changes are possible, or you might rightly think, if you were one of the 55%, do you know what I see coming? I see new boss, same as the old boss. I see no particular difference after a heck of a lot of stramash. So I think we have to start thinking about these very practical things and begin to think politics is a lot closer to home and begin to get into community stuff, because it is the sort of thing that exercises people and certainly gets folk annoyed once they realise the limitations. But for heaven's sake, let's start arguing for a structure of politics and power within Scotland that gives literally power to the people and absolutely creates councils again in towns like Dunfermline. Thank you.
Thank you, Lesley. We actually have quite a few councillors in the room. Community councillors too. Because there has been a resurgence in interest in the more local aspects of representation. I'm not going to ask them to put their hands up, but I can see quite a few people who are involved in local politics who weren't involved in it before the referendum. So perhaps things are beginning to change at that level. We happen to be an order of speaking at the table here, but I'm inclined to go to my far left-hand side and ask Ollie Sullivan from Commonweal if he'll take up the challenge of saying, where are we going now?
Ollie's just for the far left.
Thanks very much. Thanks for asking me here. I'm born and bred in Dunfermline, but I live in Edinburgh. I seem to come back and see a flip a week. It's as true as this. I've been involved in, as I said, politics and political institutions. I was a Labour Party member before I left. I was a Labour councillor for this ward. I worked for the council. I worked for trade unions. You know, all these institutions and organisations were set up, you know, predominantly to try and create a more democratic, equal society. But let's be honest, they didn't succeed. They failed. And when you think about it, what Lesley was talking about, those institutions themselves were not democratic or equal. They're extremely hierarchical. Power that's sat in the centre. As Lesley, I think there's only one way really to think about politics. This can be contested, but it's about power. It's about who has it, why they want it, what they're going to do with it. And inevitably these institutions, and when I worked for the Labour Party, part of my job is to make sure the right people got power. So I know how it works, and I know how it's not particularly equal or democratic, same in the trade union movement. Council is a little bit better. But the council is still a hugely hierarchical structure with power at the centre. And so how could these institutions that were not democratic and equal in themselves create a more equal and democratic society? The means does not equal the ends. But I think something interesting happened here during the referendum. It's been hugely exciting for me and anybody else that's been involved in politics, for some time. We used to go to meetings with this, and there's 3 people at it. And that, as Lesley says, that's changed. And I think it's changed. I think things have not only changed in Scotland, they've changed all over the world really, but they've been amplified here. The same as they've been amplified in Greece and they've been amplified in Spain, because there they've got horrible austerity, and that makes people get interested in politics. Here we had a referendum and we managed to change the narrative, and hopefully, and we tell you a little bit about Commonweal, and hopefully Commonweal was part of that, Nordic Horizon was part of that, Riddock was part of that. We managed to change the narrative, not to be about whether you want to get independent or not, but what sort of Scotland you wanted to live in, and about being more equal and more fair, in a way that we, as we say in Commonweal, a politics about all of us first instead of me first. Because we thought that actually, that's a lie that we've been told, that it's better, if you just look after yourself, if the dog eat dog. If that's not fulfilling. That doesn't make you feel good. Helping and working as a group of people to achieve a better Dunfermline or a better Scotland. That's what makes life worthwhile. And you've got to wake up to that lie and realise this and communicate that. And that's hopefully what Commonweal has been about. So I want to talk about the optimism now, because the changes that are happening in Scotland and the changes that are happening elsewhere in the world, I think are being, these hierarchical structures that I spoke about came about for a reason. They were about control and management of information. The only way that big organisations could work was getting all the information at one point so that decisions could be made, and that was the only way, because you think about it, you can only photocopy so many things, you can't distribute them widely. I think we saw in the referendum, we're seeing other places, that technology is changing everything. Marx said the windmill begot the agrarian landlord, the steam engine begot the industrial capitalist. We've got to ask ourselves, what are the power structures that now come about with Google and the smartphone? And they're different. They've changed. Things are flatter. Things are more horizontal. We can all talk to each other. We can all share information. The media barons can now, not on the behest of the people, the elites that run society, tell us what stuff means and tell us what's important. During the referendum, people could, Osborne could make a speech about the economy, and people could be on sharing YouTube videos of other world-renowned economists saying that it was Tom bollocks, and they could share that with everybody. Before that, when we reported in the media, and we would have said, we'd have had an uncomfortable feeling, maybe that's not quite right, I don't really agree with him. And maybe we went to the pub and said it to a mate, but they must know what they're talking about. But then, but this, we could share it now. We could, I always use the example of the patronising women. People felt uncomfortable that went on Twitter and shared it. And everyone said, "Yeah, that's not right." And there was a huge backlash against it. So I think technology is changing stuff. People have always built networks. It used to be the old guys network that ran everything. But now, with technology, we can make it people's network. So that's the opportunity. But it's a time of change as well, so that the opportunity does not necessarily go in our direction. We've got to grab it and shape it and make it in our direction. And so I think Commonweal's partly doing that. I mean, it's fantastic to me to be part of these organisations that always worked from the centre, always said, oh, we're going to set up a local group in Dunfermline, or we're going to set up a local group in Kirkcaldy, or we've got to control. When I worked for the Labour Party, it was always like, they can only get this list because lists for power, or we'll keep this list. You can't share the list between the different constituencies because they might talk to each other and get organised. And no wonder these organisations are trophy and die away in a time when you kind of these hierarchies don't look like how we live our lives. You know, we live them horizontally and network. But what's been amazing for me is like I was at the Commonweal meeting in Concordia on Saturday. You know, nobody told them they set that meeting up. Nobody told them to set up meetings here. There's 50 groups across Scotland now. You know, people doing stuff like guerrilla gardening. People want to set up house factories to build houses. People want to do all these things. There just isn't, you know, and that is fantastic. More of them will rise. And more of them will, some of them want to set up food banks. You know, they decide themselves what they want to do. I think what we've got to be able to do is connect them. And also, there's got to be a connection between this horizontalism and the way that power is at the moment. It's not going to shift overnight. So we have, I work for the Electoral Reform Society Tuesday. I believe in representative democracy. It's important. You know, it's in trouble and it's struggling, but you know. It's important, but we have to be able to connect that. I was in Westminster this morning, and that is, you know, the most disjointed, strange, weird place, you know, that's so disconnected from anything that people's ordinary lives is. But it's amazing. And, you know, I got to be honest, Fife Council is much closer, but it's still distant to Dunfermline. So we have to find ways to connect these hierarchies and remote places to how people live their lives, and I think that's part of the role of the Commonweal. So when we want to connect the local groups, I don't know if you've seen Common Space, which at the moment is a news service because we think it's important that you know users reported. It's reported from a left-wing perspective, but that's not the important thing really. It's stories that probably don't get picked up by the normal papers, by the normal media. Who sets the agenda? So Common Space is important for that. I might just say, I'm going to tell you about what we've set up with Commonweal. But first of all, I want to say it's completely funded by crowdsourced funding. So it's people giving small donations, £5, £10 a month, which is in total now about £12,000 a month, regular committed income, going to an organisation that wants to argue for all of us first type of politics. I just think that's incredible, you know, and really humbling. People are just putting their money into some £12,000 a month, so there's 9 part-time members of staff now, enough to pay, as I said, in Common Space, investigative journalists who are going out there and finding stories and breaking stories from the perspective of, you know, all of us first type of politics. And offering that connection between the horizontal and the vertical, we've got, you know, before the referendum, there was 50 policy papers written on everything from welfare to tax, so that we knew when we were going to make these arguments that we had to have the numbers, we had to have done the research, and we had to have made the case for them. So that's why these 50 research papers by leading academics and anybody, you know, the goodwill around Commonweal is incredible. People doing bits of work for us, doing bits of research, writing quite detailed policy papers has been amazing. But that was turned into a book that was accessible for everybody, because a lot of it was like policy jargon, wonk speak, and tables and graphs and stuff, and not everybody gets that stuff or wants to get that stuff. So it was turned into this book, Commonweal. I don't know if you've read it, but it's like it's painting a picture of the type of society we want to live in. I think in Scotland, it's talking about everybody having, you know, an affordable home to live in, everybody having a job that's like reasonably interesting and paid enough, and everybody, you know, feeling safe. You know, feeling safe that they won't lose their house, that they won't lose their job, that they'll be able to have time for their family and friends, being able to, you know, love and be loved. These are the sort of things that we should be talking about in politics, and not just about GDP growth and economic figures. So that kind of overall narrative type of society, I think, is what's given us support. But using these resources now to kind of connect that horizontal with the vertical, we've got full-time public affairs person working in the Scottish Parliament to make an argument for the type of politics we want, as well as that media operation and a policy team as well. So The next stage is after the blue book, which kind of described what sort of society we want, is to leading up to the 2016 election is to get more and more policy work done and to write this thing that's going to be called the Black Book. And it's going to be a kind of description of how we transform Scotland with the powers that we have at the Scottish Parliament into an all of us first sort of society. I'm just going to speak a little bit about the Red Lines campaign, because that's a kind of campaign that's on the go at the moment. And it's possible because, you know, British politics is kind of broken. It's in flux. We have a system that was designed for the two big parties, the Tories and the Conservatives, now falling apart. You know.
Makes no difference.
Those big parties of the centre right. No, so it looks like I was down. The reason I was in Westminster today was I was getting a presentation for the British election survey that's looking at all the data to see what will happen in the general election, and it looks like they're neck and neck, the Tories and Labour. And it looks like, I mean, you know, psychologists and people that study elections will never really tell you, and look at polls, will never tell you they think this is definitely going to happen. But it's unusual, it's very unusual for the polls to change dramatically over the short campaign. So this looks possible. And that means that the SNP, Plaid, the Greens are going to have an extremely, as I think Alex Salmon today said, if you have the balance of power, you have the power. And so that gives us an opportunity, because, you know, if we can get those groups from Common Weal's perspective, which is, you know, broadly non-party, if we can get these parties to unite against the sort of policy of that we've been arguing for, you know, a politics of all of us first, then we can really kind of make some policy changes in Westminster that kind of makes the ground for that. So we've got five demands. I love having speaking purpose.
Give the 5 demands.
I don't want to expand on them too much, I don't know about this time. But anyway, I'll tell you what they are, and we'll leave open for questions if people want to know.
Well, maybe Grant could expand on them.
Yeah. Stop cutting and start investing. This idea that kind of cutting, you know that you can generate economic growth by cutting. You know, if you've invested in a house building programme, for example, which you've been borrowing money for sure, but you know there's a revenue generation from building houses. You get return on rent. You know, there is stuff the land reform needs to be done on that. Return on power to people, stuff that Lesley spoke about. You know, the huge centralisation and concentration of power away from us. You know, people don't. I mean, I did some work on this last year. People that don't vote. People don't vote because, I mean, they did vote in the referendum, but they generally don't vote because they don't think it makes any difference. And actually, the people that I spoke to that have never voted in East End of Glasgow think people that vote are a bit daft. You know, because it seems like you're doing something that's never going to make any difference. And you know, Russell Brand has a point where he goes, you're just encouraging these people and giving them legitimacy. So we need to make sure that people really have power, and that is about voting, but it's about much more than that as well. As I said about structure. We need to do something about Westminster, you know, House of Lords, the largest chamber outside of the People's Republic of China. You know, not elected, appointed, mainly by people who give big money to the political parties. There was some work done last week just to show that, you know, the best way to get a seat in the House of Lords is to give big money to the party. That's horribly corrupt. We did a lot of work on the next one is raising wages. I mean, everybody said to us, like, you know, putting wages up, you know, that will bomb the economy. You know, people can't afford it. You know, actually, what it will do is it might reduce profits a bit. But we showed that you know, do you know most people in this country that earn, you know, 3/5 of people earn below £23,000 a year. You know, that's the vast majority of people earn below that. You know, if we could get them up to something like Nordic levels of income, which I think we were saying was something like average £26,000 to £27,000 a year, there'd be an extra £2 billion coming in taxation. And not only was that, and that money would be spent on stuff in the economy, because if you concentrate wages at the top, which is kind of happening in an hourglass economy, then people don't spend that money. So raising wages, it's a valid, I mean, we've done loads of research on that, it's a valid economic initiative. And back children instead of trying, we all know the money that's wasted on these weapons of mass destruction. I'm not going to, it don't make us any safer at all. And instead we could be investing that in child care and all sorts of things to do, child poverty. Addressing child poverty would be a much better way to spend that money. So that's the five red lines. They've not been massively high publicly campaigning because we've been talking to the parties about it, and we've got mostly the SNP behind this anti-austerity and five lines campaign. We've got the Greens in England behind it through what we're doing with Compass down there and Plaid as well. So I think one of the amazing photographs of the last time was the three female leaders of these parties standing together on progressive politics. And just imagine if they've got real power after the election to implement some of these all of us first politics. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lloyd. You mentioned the social media, so it reminds me of Douglas Alexander. He seemed genuinely baffled. And he said, before we used to have facts, now we've got Facebook. And he was completely baffled that what he was meaning was, before we gave you the facts and you believed them and you didn't discuss them and you couldn't debunk them. And now, when we're telling you lies, you know they're lies. Anyway, thank you very much for that. And to maybe explain how Commonweal, you mentioned the local Commonweal groups. We've got Grant Butters from Commonweal 5 based in Kirkcaldy, and maybe you could explain how Commonweal 5 came about, because it was news to me that there were Commonweal groups within it. And they're not just Commonweal in Kirkcaldy, but there's also Commonweal Versailles, and I don't know if you've got representatives of that organisation here, but can you explain where that arrived, where that came from, and what your plans are?
Right, well, this is good, isn't it? What was the Victor Hugo said? You can't keep an idea whose time has come. Yes, got 45%. But we got 45% in the face of all the weapons the British establishment getting thrown at us. We got 45%. We're still here. We're still talking and finding ways to work together. First of all, just say forgive the script. I'm not a natural public speaker. Sort of things to keep me focused. I end up going off on some weird tangent, which might be quite interesting, but not the point of why we're here tonight. I've also not timed this, so hopefully I'm under time to make up before we went over a wee bit there. I also made the great mistake of deciding to rewrite this in my lunch break this afternoon, so it all starts to become a bit disjointed. Just bear with me.
We're on the edge of our seats, man.
I was asked to come here to say a bit about what Commonweal 5 are doing, but just before I get into the detail of that, just a bit of background about me and how I came into this, to give you a bit of context. I've been involved in left politics on and off since the 1980s, back in Dundee, where I was born and grew up. I was involved in the anti-poll tax campaign, Time strike. I was there at the very start of the Scottish Socialist Party, but for personal reasons, personal circumstances, I drifted away. And although I've been looking for a way back in, it was really the referendum campaign, and particularly the result actually that got me off my arse, if you'll pardon the expression, to get involved in things again and get back into active politics. And what an array of politics we have facing us. The songwriter Brian McNeill famously wrote, "I still prefer sheep to thinking men, but men that think like sheep are even better." And what a shout of sheep we've got out there. Our elected representatives, with notable exceptions, particularly from the 1980s onwards, marched off into this neoliberal orthodoxy agenda set by corporate interests and their lackeys in the media, and dissenting voices were scarcely heard, or if they were heard, were silenced very quickly. But then came the referendum, and there was this explosion of voices saying, no, it doesn't have to be like this anymore. We can do this different, and we're all saying this at the same time. The cause for yes became the cause for a wholly different way of organising society and the economy. What's more, organisations that I remember being very, very suspicious of each other and not really liking to work together began to see that actually the spectrum of views that they shared had much more in common with each other, and concentrating on these little points of theory as a means of not achieving a workable consensus towards change was something that was just going to have to be parked. But it wasn't just existing organisations, there was new ones emerging: Women for Independence, RIC, Scottish Left Project, and of course Common Weal. Again, people were beginning to work together, and they weren't defined solely by the organisation they happened to be most active in, but were constantly working with other people. And I think that defines the situation we find ourselves in now. So, but to get to the specifics about Commonweal Fife, Commonweal Fife started as a Facebook page. Somebody who's not a member of the group now, didn't have the time available to do anything, set up a Facebook page, and a small handful of us sort of found it and decided to meet up. This was November last year. We got together in the Duchess in Kirkcaldy just to discuss what we might do. One of the first things we were very clear about is that this is not our baby. We're certainly the first people who have got together to talk about setting up a Commonweal group in Fife, but it wasn't ours. The main thing was to get more people involved. So we said, well, we'll see if we can get some people to come along to a meeting, and we organised one for the 1st of December, put stuff up on Facebook and Twitter, and hope for the best. On what I remember as being quite a cold and miserable night, 1st of December, 60 or probably more people packed in the function room at the Sinclair Tavern in Kirkcaldy, and Commonweal Fife was born. Well, other thing we didn't want to be, this wasn't going to be a traditional sort of branch meeting where everybody turning up and there's a nice set agenda and everybody sort of walks through it and goes away and pats himself on the back thinking, job well done. It was to be a forum, and getting people together was getting the ideas together to decide what Commonweal Fife was going to be. And it was just us, everybody who turned up, and we set up discussions around the tables, just working with the way the space was configured, and left people questions to discuss and see what came up, what were going to be the most important issues, the most pressing issues for them, what brought them on to Commonweal Fife, what they want Commonweal Fife to do for them. And more importantly, what they wanted to do as Commonweal Fife. It's still early days, but there's no blueprint for a Commonweal group. As Willie said, these groups just sort of emerged out of, they weren't part of a grand plan that there would be Commonweal groups in localities, but it's something that's happened. We've been to see Commonweal in North Leith, who are one of the sort of first visible groups, just to see how they're doing things. But we're not Edinburgh. We've got different issues that are most pressing to us. The geography is different, people's time availability is different. I've also spoken to Commonweal Angus and Commonweal Perth just to see what they're doing. And again, it's a big mix of different ideas and different priorities to how we want to do it. But excuse me a second. This is new politics. We didn't go into this thinking we had a blueprint for how we were going to do things. We want to sort of mix it up and see how things fall and see what people want to do first. In terms of who's involved, we've got Greens, we've got Socialists, we've got SNP, we've got non-affiliated people. We don't all agree with each other, and we quite like it. The Commonweal book that Willie mentioned earlier is certainly the start of the discussion, but it's not the end. It's something that people used to identify that Commonweal was going to be an organisation that represented their aspirations to some degree or another, and brought them along to meeting and keeps bringing them back to meetings, but it's just a start. the word horizontal has been used earlier, and that's it. We're certainly a very horizontal organisation. We currently got about 6 organisers who meet up regularly to try and plan the next event and programme things, but the meetings are absolutely amazing. I've never been at meetings like them when everybody, and I mean everybody, has something to say. There's no shrinking violets in the corner. Everybody has got a point that they want to make and they want to be part of the discussion. So this is really putting politics back with the people and creating a space for that to happen. We're also hoping to get physical space. That's one of the things we're working on at the moment. Trying a few options out. There's one now that's come forward in Kirkcaldy that I think might be a place where we can meet regularly, similar to what the group are doing in Edinburgh, North and Leeds. So we have regular drop-ins, bigger events, book groups, even craft sessions or just turning up for the leather. The meetings today, we've had four sort of regular meetings, and an extra one where we got Duncan McCann from the Economics Forum came up to speak to us and exploded a few myths about how money works in currency, which was quite enlightening. And we'd like to be in a position to facilitate anybody else who wants to come to talk to us, as well as seeking out people to come and speak to us as well. So what's coming up next? Well, the 8th of April, Lesley's going to talk to us. We're doing a joint event with One for Independence in the St Clair Tavern. The 19th of April, we've got a pre-general election event, not a traditional hustings, but what we've gone for is a lot of speakers from yes/progressive organisations, asking them to look at what's happening in the run-up to general election and look towards the Holyrood elections and beyond. And I think that's going to be quite a big one. That's in the Temple Hall Community Centre in Kirkcaldy. Global Justice now are coming to talk TTIP with us on the 28th of May. The other big one we've got planned is some sort of Commonwealth Fife Festival in St Blaise's Kirk in Kirkcaldy, which I think is quite apt given it was Gordon Brown's father's. We're not sure exactly that's going to comprise at the moment. It's probably going to be a bit of discussion, a bit of entertainment. We've got the producer of the Happy Lands agreed to do a show and we'll do some sort of Q&A after that. We're trying to get a few people to sort of take that as a little project and run with it, so it's not the main organisers that are doing that, and then they can turn it into whatever they want. So more on that in due course. And I've mentioned the space that we're trying to get in Kirkcaldy. But just stepping back a little bit from the specifics of what's going on in locality. We're aware we're not the only show in town. We're not one to start reinventing wheels. It's all about dialogue, and I think bypassing the traditional political structures that cause so much inertia and sort of what people off. And we also want to move from just talking to doing some real doing. Some great examples of what's going on in other parts of the country. And we've got some ideas of our own, but we're still at that point where we're just going to get a shape around it and work out who's going to do it. I've mentioned we're having economics and vocal justice now. That's the sort of thing we'd like to move more on. We're not involved in events such as this. We're hoping to talk. We've got members who've got connections with People's Assembly Fife, and I think there's probably some things going to emerge on that front. I've also had a discussion with WEA in Fife, who's working on some really interesting events as part of the new politics, trying to see if there's anything we can do together. And we're hoping to talk to Riddock and the Scottish Left Project in due course. That's on the almost top of the next things to do. I think most importantly, or certainly important, is the fact that we've got people involved who are part of political parties and people who are not. And the people who are not part of existing political parties are still managing to influence what's going on in political parties through the discussion we're having in common real, where people go back into the parties and take some of the ideas that we've discussed to them. I'll pose a question. There was one that came up on our meeting that Willie referred to on Saturday there. does the political party actually need to be completely reinvented? Well, to conclude, Commonweal Life is what people who get involved in it make it. Nobody else is going to, has got any blueprint for what we want to do, so it's up to us to decide what we want to do with it. So, an appeal to you, follow us online from long-term meetings, work with us on some issue. Well, just one of the many signs that Scotland is awake. It was the people who delivered 45% in the referendum, and it's the people that are going to decide what happens next. A better Scotland, a fairer world, all of us first. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. That was certainly giving our group a lot of things to think about, and perhaps join in with you in some of the projects you've got going. When I said that Jonathan Shafti had been invited by Lewis Acres, I should have said that Lewis is now a member of the Scottish Youth Parliament. So not only do we have councillors and community councillors, we've even got an MSYP. So, without further ado, Jonathan Shafti of Radical Independence, and one of the founders of Radical Independence, Jonathan.
Okay. I'm not going to speak for long because it's warm, and I'm sure people want some there, but I just want to make, I think, a few points. When I would say probably 2 or 3 weeks before the referendum itself, we had a discussion inside Radical Independence about the conference that we were told that year after the referendum. And clearly it's a difficult thing to discuss because if it's a yes vote, you're thinking, well, let's hire Hamden. And if it's a no vote, you're thinking maybe we could have it in my back room. So what we did was we thought, we'll just go and we'll book the Radisson. The Radisson holds about 800 people. So we booked the Radisson and we had everything lined up ready to go the next day. We got a no vote. We put it on social media the next day, and about 7,000 or 8,000 people said on Facebook that attended, and I got a phone about it. I says, to be quite honest with you, people are just clicking anything that's pro-independence, people are lashing out, you know, this is something that's going to die away. So we started the process of selling tickets. So a couple of days I phoned up and says, right, how many tickets are we actually on? He says, we've sold over 1,000 tickets in about 5 days. And I was like, well, hold on a minute, the conference is a few months away, the Radisson's already more than full, we're going to need a new venue. So we booked the Clyde Auditorium, and we sold more tickets. And then I got another call saying, by the way, there's a big demand for breakout space. Okay, we'll book the Science Centre across the road, and we'll book the Crown Plaza, and we'll book the Garden Hilton for a creche, and we'll get 3,000 people there, and we'll see what happens. And the night before, I tell you, the night before was one of those nights where you're just thinking, Jesus Christ, should I turn up tomorrow? Or should we just sort of you know, let it go, see how things go? But it was fantastic, and it went well, and it ran smoothly, and there was about 3,000 people there. And by the way, there was about 12,000 people next door with Nicola Sturgeon, and one of the big problems that we thought would happen was, well, everyone's going to want to go and see Nicola Sturgeon, but no. There was a real vibrant discussion amongst thousands of people at the Riddock conference, because what we've managed to build collectively, all of us, has been this movement of people wanting a different way to the one set out by Westminster. And so, from our point of view, certainly the movement which was so inspiring throughout the referendum hadn't disappeared. But it was only a couple of weeks ago when I went home after work and picked up a leaflet from the floors and walked in. It was what? Labour leaflet, you know that big red folder? I'll read that one and then I made my dinner. Give it dinner, put it back on the table and opened it up. And what was inside was a leaflet from the Scotland office. I don't know if anyone's had this. It's a leaflet from the Scotland office that says, Our United Future. It could have been written by Blair McDougall, actually, throughout the referendum. Jesus, what's inside the Labour Party leaflet? I'll go on Twitter, I'll tweet about this. A promoted tweet comes up again from the Scotland office. And this is no joke. If I'm going to stick some music on, at this very moment, went on YouTube to put on my favourite song, I'm not going to tell you what it is. And what came up? A video advert from the Scotland office telling us about our united future. I thought, this referendum is not over. In fact, after the referendum, and the thing I said at the RIT conference, I now disagree with. Because I was saying at the RIT conference, and many of us within RIT thought this is going to be another 15, 20 years, maybe longer, before we're going to get another referendum. I now believe that we are looking at another referendum far, far sooner. And I actually think, I'll just put this out there as a thought, I think we're in a better position to do it sooner rather than later. Because Project Fear might work again in 15 or 20 or even 10 years' time. It's not going to work again in 3 to 5 years' time. It's something that we need to think about. And when we talk about our movement, I think it's important as well that we look at Westminster. Because what's happening with the British state just now is not just a crisis when it comes to the question of the Constitution, but they are facing now a deep, a profound, a multifaceted crisis, not just of the government and of the state, but of all of its associated institutions, of the media, of the banks, of the financial services industry, of all of these things. And when you have a crisis like that, when you have a crisis which is not just about one personality, one political party, who everyone wants to get rid of, but something far more profound, then you have a crisis of the political system. That is what this general election represents and reflects. The Labour Party cannot understand, but don't these people want the Tories out? Well, of course we want the Tories out. But actually people now want something far more than just not having the Tories. They want to see a completely different system, a completely different way of doing politics, one which you cannot be delivered through Westminster. That's the political awakening that's happened. And the problem that the Labour Party and Westminster and so on have when it comes to this is they can't unwind that process. They are not going to be able to re-win the people of Scotland to the Westminster system because both of them are organising more austerity, because both of them have taken us into wars in the past which no one agreed with. Because there has been a fundamental degradation, not just politically and practically in terms of how they carry out their business, but ideologically and intellectually. In other words, there is no uniting ideology behind the British state anymore. And that's why, by the way, they tell us to blame the immigrants. That's why they tell us to blame the so-called work-shy, because they've not got anything good to say about themselves. So let's say everything that's bad about everyone else and focus people's attention on that. So we now have, I think, an important set of leads coming up. I'm not a member of the SNP, as you'll know. I'm not going to be advocating any particular direction to vote in this general election. But what I will say is that the importance, the continued importance of the social movement around Scotland is absolutely fundamental to where we go. There is, I think, partly a problem which is associated with the no vote. What they are trying to do now, I think, is to set up a situation where it looks like the debate is about a competing set of nationalisms. See these cartoons that they have in the paper, see these Tory propaganda videos. It's basically about saying, well, all the discussion really is about here is about how Scottish you feel or that sort of thing. Labour Party and Jim Murphy, when they talk about we need to be a patriotic party again, still not understanding that that really was not what was at stake here. But there is a danger that we as a movement fall into that trap, because it's angering to hear this kind of nonsense on the television constantly, to see these sorts of cartoons. It's frustrating, it makes you want to turn around and say, I'm Scottish and I'm proud of it, and damn well I want out of the United Kingdom. But it was about so much more during the referendum. And we have to have, as a movement, a level of political maturity that says, we're going to put that to one side, and we're going to keep banging away at the social issues. We're going to keep talking about a new economy, keep talking about a new democracy. We are going to keep alive those ideas which set Scotland ablaze when it came to the referendum process. I think that's fundamentally important as we go forward. And to be quite honest with you, the only force that can do that is the array of social movements which have been set up. I don't think any one political party can do that, because they're forced into positions. The SNP will be forced into positions of compromise. It is down to us, whether you're in the SNP or not, it's down to us as a social movement to continue to organise on that basis. So the question that comes, I think, for Yes Groups and for other associated organisations that are part of the independence movement, what are we doing both locally and nationally which is making an impact on that question, on the question of the social issues? What are we doing about the question of land reform? What are we doing to promote an agenda which says, let's not institutionalise food banks, let's ask the question why they're there in the first place. Let's get back to answering and asking the fundamental questions which we raised about the referendum. My last couple of points. I was lucky enough to be in Athens at the time of the Greek election and to be part of seeing Syriza come to power. And it was quite interesting because Syriza had this huge tent with hundreds of people campaigning and thousands of people on the streets actually when they won. And PASOK, who essentially is the Labour Party in Greece, they, I have to say, looked very down. But not only that, they had about 2 or 3 people giving out leaflets. They were a party no longer. I think what's happening to the Labour Party now is the same process that happened to PASOK in Greece. In other words, the crisis of the Labour Party is not something that is just for the moment. It's not something just calibrated by specific circumstances which affect it for now, which it can then overcome. In Scotland in particular, there has now been an organic break between the Labour Party and the social base. And that is irreversible. It's irreversible. It doesn't matter if the SNP mess up and Labour Party come in with some better policies. There is now, I believe, a growing, a generational split between the Labour Party and the activists and the people that it's meant to represent and meant to reflect in its politics. And what that means, I think, is that we have now a huge task ahead of us. We have a huge task in terms of keeping the social movement going, but we also have another duty, I think. And I'm not, of course, speaking for everyone in Rick here, or indeed hoping to reflect the attitudes of most people in this room. I'm simply giving a personal view that we now have a duty to replace the Labour Party. But we must replace the Labour Party with more than just the SNP for this reason. That you need to have an opposition which is effective to have a functioning democracy, first. Second, how much better a situation will we be in if the government in Scotland is pro-independence, but so too is the official opposition? Imagine having that in the Scottish Parliament. The official opposition and the SNP were both pro-independence, but at the same time we've got important political differences, which can't be reconciled by simply being part of the same political party. If we are in that situation, think about this, if we are in that situation at the time of another referendum, close enough but far away enough for us to get organised, but far away but close enough for Project Fear not to be simply replayed, then I think we will win the referendum. And I think we will win the referendum on good terms. We won't win it just because we were angry at the Labour Party. We won't win it just because we were pissed off at the Tories. We will win it because we discovered, in a sense, our own liberation. We discovered our own politics, our own way of doing things. We founded a nation on the basis of those principles, not on the basis of just what we opposed. And that, I think, is why the Scottish Left Project, which probably no one here has heard of yet, has been set up. What this is an attempt to do is to bring together a coalition of the radical left, which can express itself electorally at the ballot box in 2016, to give us all collectively the chance, not just to elect radical MSPs, which can form an exciting part of Scottish democracy, an important part of Scottish democracy, but which can actually begin to reflect, to institutionalise in the Parliament the ideals of this great movement of ours. And I think that is something which is going to be difficult, it's something which is going to be testing and challenging, but I do think that given the circumstances with the Labour Party, that it's something that we have to at least attempt. I'll just end by saying this. I want to end on this. We have been fed for so long now, from not just the Tory press, not just the right-wing press, but from the BBC and others. We have been fed for so long this idea that the real problem that we have in our society is there's too many people coming from other countries. The reason I mention